Another tough loss on the road for Kansas State.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. Welcome to this live post-game reaction as Kansas State falls with another road loss. Can't get one on the road so far this year. Falling late to the Baylor Bears in Big 12 action. You had a 12-point lead, 20-point swing, and then you lose by 8 points. Same song and dance? Is there at least some things to take from this one? I think so. I think there's a lot of things we can discuss in this episode. I think there's a lot to take from. Some good for the future, something we've been talking about for quite some time over on this show. But overall, when it's all said and done, a loss is a loss, and Kansas State continues to slip. They now have the losing streak just continues for Kansas State. Ever since winning that Big 12 opener against Cincinnati, they can't get a win in this conference. And it's one of the toughest conferences in college basketball. We know that. There's no doubt about that. But you got to find a way to win, especially with this roster, and this roster just isn't cutting it. So with that being said, I want to get into this game because I feel like there's a lot to talk about. Initial thoughts, well, right when you got into this game, you saw that there were some injuries to Baylor, and the narrative was Jerome Tang going against his former team. He was an associate head coach. He was an assistant coach for Baylor for about 19 years, I believe, under Scott Drew. And then since he's came over to Kansas State and became a head coach, he's 3-0 against Drew and the Baylor Bears. Well, that all changed tonight. He's finally 3-1. Things are going not in his way this season. Now has the longest losing streak since he's been at Kansas State, and that's happening right now. He has his first loss against his former team, the Baylor Bears. That happened tonight, but he still seems to have some faith in this squad, and we'll get to that later on in the show. But overall, Tang entered 3-0 against Drew. He's now 3-1. But the beginning of the game, although it was really sloppy on both sides, it was still a lot better than it was on Saturday. On Saturday, it was a 14-0 run for the Jayhawks. Well, in this case, they were up 6-2 in the first 4 minutes. That's a great swing if you want to just talk about the first 4 minutes of this game. Because we're talking about in the Kansas game on Saturday, if you win that first 4 minutes, you probably win that game. In the eyes of everything else, you did win that game. You take those 4 minutes away on Saturday, you won the other 36. In this case, the first 4 minutes, you were 6-2. It was basically 6-5. They scored a three-pointer right after the 4 minutes, before the 16-minute timeout. But in that first 4 minutes, officially 6-2 on the scoreboard. They were up by 4 as well at halftime, and they shot well in that first half. They were shooting 50% from the field at the half. Baylor was only shooting half that. They're shooting 25%. That was the fewest points that Baylor has scored all season in a half. And Kansas State held them to that. At the beginning of this season, we talked about how terrible the defense was of Kansas State. It's not a Jerome Tang defense. We haven't seen this type of defense since Jerome Tang has been here. What is going on with this team? Well, the last couple games that has changed, and we saw that especially in the first half of this one. Now, Baylor helped out a lot by shooting terribly. They shot 25% from the field in that first half. Things turned around for them in the second half, and obviously it helped them out to win the game. But overall, the defense gave you a lot of things to be excited about, gave you those warm and fuzzies at least for the future, I guess. And I hate that we have to keep talking about the future when we're reacting to games and talking about this season now, but that's just where the mindset has to go, at least one eye, because this season is definitely in the dumps. I think this could have been, and I think you still could assume that this was a Doug McDaniel game. This was the Doug McDaniel game of the season. We saw David Castillo kind of jump out against Kansas on Saturday. I think he also had a good game today. I want to talk about him later on. Maybe Doug McDaniel took that a little, to heart, maybe, but in a good way. And he stepped up in this one and played really well. In the first half, Kansas State limited Baylor to only having the lead for 22 seconds. 22 seconds. Kansas State held on to that lead until just under 8 minutes to go in the game. Overall, this was a pretty good game by Kansas State, but we go back to the same type of conversation, and then that's where I bring up the same song and dance of you got to play 40 full minutes. And I think that other than the Cincinnati game, and I might have to go back to that game and think maybe that we didn't do that. But other than that game right now in my head, I don't think we've done that. I don't think we have played a full 40-minute game so far this season. Doug McDaniel had a great game, though. I really was excited to watch him play. 12 points. He had 4 rebounds. He only had 3 turnovers on the game, 2 assists, 5-11 from the field, 5-4-11 from the field. And he had 2 of them from the 3-point line. We got to see Hassan warm up. He was lights out in the second half. I want to get to him later on. But overall, this was a decent game for Kansas State. But at the end of the day, you fall to 7 and 11 now in conference? Am I doing that correctly? Yeah, 7 and 11 in conference, and now in a 6-game losing streak, losing your last 6 in a row. Can't have that. You absolutely can't have that. I want to get into some more thoughts here. I think David Gasson played great. There were some terrible calls that completely changed the momentum of this game. And although I don't want to point fingers, I think we definitely have to discuss the officiating in this one. It was definitely a rough one for the black and white. We'll get to that all here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace is a leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting you the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours. And it's convenient. You have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist in between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans. And for most insured members, there is a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize your mental health. And as a listener of this podcast, you can get $80 off your first month here at Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege and enter the promo code SPACE80, SPACE80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for this show. And that's Talkspace.com/lockedoncollege, promo code SPACE80. And welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Hey, check out Locked On Big 12 for your second listen of the day. But we're discussing the Kansas State Wildcats falling to the Baylor Bears after having a 12-point lead, after having a first half lead, outshooting the team by 25% in that first half. That all changed when it came into the second half. When it was all said and done, I went live as soon as this game was over. So let me go and pull up the team stats here for the second half. Baylor wound up ending the game 37.5% from the field and still won the game by 8. And they shot 25% from the field in the first half. Now, what went wrong when you're looking at the numbers? Well, they out-rebounded the Wildcats. That's obviously something that we knew that was going to probably happen. It's happened all season long. But the points in the paint, I think that's where we went wrong in the second half. Baylor adjusted great. I knew they were going to shoot better, because it's really hard to shoot any worse than 25% in a half. You had the feeling that they were going to step up. And the fact that they only had a 4-point lead with them still shooting that bad, you kind of had a feeling that this one was going to get close yet again. But with Baylor, what they did, I think, right in this one, other than having some great performances by a couple players that I want to get to in a minute, was them limiting Kansas State's points in the paint. Kansas State ended the game with 30 points in the paint, but they had 20 of them in the first half. So they couldn't get as much traffic inside the paint. Now, obviously, that comes into play with them, being down towards the end of the game, shooting some threes. But it all comes into one moment of the game. And I want to get to David Gasson. I think David Gasson played a great game, by the way. His energy was an absolute game changer, especially early in the game. Finished with 13 points. He had 2 blocks. I swear it was 3, by the way. I watched him hit a block. They might have gave it to Hawkins instead, but I watched him hit a block, and I never saw the stat sheet move. I swear he has 3 blocks, but regardless of the case, finished with a double-double as well, 13, 11 rebounds, 6 for 10 from the field. The 3 throws were obviously killer. I mean, he gave the crowd cupcakes because he missed 2 in a row, but he was only 25% from the charity strike. That was really a killer. The only thing that was a big mistake from his game. But those all came after this weird call. He was defending a 3-point shot, or at least close to a 3-point shot. I can't remember if it was behind the line or not. And it completely avoided the defender. The defender kicked out his leg to make contact with Gasson, and the ref called a foul. Now, they even reviewed this call, and they still came back and confirmed it and sent Baylor to the line to shoot some 3 throws. Now, that might not seem like a big deal, and to be completely honest, it probably shouldn't have been. But after the game, or after that play, it seemed like everything just fell apart for Kansas State. It felt like they started rushing shots, making bad passes. I mean, even some of their inbounds were bad. They had a turnover right on an inbound. They were forced to take multiple timeouts early in this one. It changed the entire momentum of this. And then eventually Baylor took their first lead in that second half with about 7:52 left in the game. Now, Baylor was without their star guard, Jeremy Roach, but that didn't seem to matter because VJ Edgecombe, their freshman, who right now, according to ESPN, is mocked to go 4th overall in the NBA draft this season, was just absolutely electric. And he took over. He took over this game, and Kansas State did not have an answer for him. He had a career high 30 points. He was 8 for 13 from the field. He went to the 3-throw line 12 times. He was so aggressive. He was everything you would hope for a player. And to be completely honest, he was playing at a pro level. I mean, he was the real thing. When you're talking about seeing, mock drafts and you're seeing a guy going in the top 5, and obviously you think of like Cooper Flagg right now from Duke, and he's the real thing. There's no doubt about it. But then when you're trying to figure out the players behind him, because there's not many players that are going to get that same type of coverage right now as Flagg does. But overall, he has played fantastic. He's probably playing some of the best basketball in the Big 12 right now, at least in that game that we just saw tonight against Kansas State. It's a dang shame that Kansas State had to be the reason that he's probably going to move up even higher on some teams' draft boards heading into the NBA draft this season. Kansas State, again, falls by 8 points after leading by 12. But the energy of this team didn't seem to fade. And that's a plus side, because when we have seen some losses so far this season, or just some bad performances, and although they lost this game by 8 points, I don't know if I want to rush to put this one in a bad performance category. I'm not going to put it in good, but I think this one can stay in the middle for right now. I think this one we'll put it in the needs to be sorted section and just keep it there. Because I do believe that there were many things to take from this game. Obviously, with Baylor not having their guard, with Edgecombe stepping up, they took some advantage and they limited Omier, who was supposed to be the guy to step up, especially in that first half. But the energy of this team, I think, was very good. And we saw it early in this game. I think they played with some really good momentum, especially being on the road. It just couldn't be for a full 40 minutes. And that was the biggest issue. The biggest issue for this team all season long is not the fact that they can't win on the road, because obviously that's an issue, but there's more underlying issues to it. Not to the fact that they've paid all these players NIL money and they can't figure it out. They can't gel. The problem with this team is they cannot play a full 40 minutes of basketball. And I don't know if you should point the finger at the players on the court, the rotation, the coaching staff. I haven't nailed that one down myself. I personally haven't done a full 40 minutes of basketball in that case. And I want to get to the bottom of that before the season's over. Regardless, this season is over for Kansas State, and we have to look for the future. And there's still plenty of things for us to look forward to. And we're going to do that here on this show. And we're going to continue to do that throughout the season, heading into the offseason as well, because there is a core on this roster right now. And we're starting to see it. And I think we're starting to get even more of an idea of who are going to be those players that this coaching staff, who is going to be here, they're not going anywhere. Unless they voluntarily choose to leave, they're not going anywhere. Let's put that into the meta right now. But I think we're starting to get an idea of who's going to be that core, and I want to talk about them. I think Doug McDaniel might have a good chance of staying. I'd hope to, after what I've seen from him over the past couple days, past couple games, I think I'd like to say Doug McDaniel. I really liked what I saw from him and from some of the other players on this team. I also really liked what I saw from the defense, and we're going to get to that in just a second. If you're listening in, feel free to leave a comment, drop it below, ask some questions. I'd love to answer them here live on the show, live reaction show here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, this message is brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money action with over 10 million members and billions of winnings. Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports, whether it's playoffs or regular season. Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to enjoy the football action. Now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. All you simply have to do is pick more or less with two players, and then if your picks hit, you can win up to $1,000 in cash. Yeah, that's right, $1,000 in cash. This is the easiest way to make money with Prize Picks. I mean, just pick some easy ones. I mean, you're going to the AFC Championship game right now, Chiefs versus Bills. Travis Kelce stepped up last week. Play something easy. Play like over 75 receiving yards for him. Let's go to the NFC Championship game. I think Terry McLaurin could step up. He did it last week as well. Jalen Daniels is on a dang mission. And I'm going to go over 75 receiving yards with him. You might even be able to play that lower, but the higher you go, the more of the multiplier. So go ahead and play that. To me, that's the hot take of the season, is just playing some reasonable numbers and keeping them up. Travis Kelce, Terry McLaurin, that's where I'm going for this championship games this Sunday. So get ready to run your game this football season. Download the app and use code LOCKEDONCollege. And listen to this, get $50 instantly if you play your first $5 lineup. That's it, just $50 just for playing. So don't wait, take the next level up with Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. And welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State. Let's wrap this one up. And unfortunately, we're wrapping this up with a loss. Where do we go from here? And I want to talk about the defense, and I want to talk about what players continue to step up and look good for not only the rest of the season and where we're probably going to see them play more, but I think we're starting to get an idea of who the core players are moving forward. I mentioned Doug McDaniel at the end of the segment. I've mentioned him a couple times in this game because I think it was, and if the win was over, I think we would be talking more of the Doug McDaniel game, because he played really well. I don't know if you want to call it a chip on your shoulder because of all the David Castillo talk over the weekend. But either way, Doug McDaniel played great. Speaking of David Castillo, I really liked the moments when Jerome Tang played both of them on the court. I felt like the movement, and then we go back to that whole energy word, I feel like that was when this team was at its pinnacle in tonight's game. I thought they played fantastic when both of them were on the court. Now, I'd like to look at the plus minus. I haven't looked at that yet. I don't even know if it's out at the moment. Usually they wait for the plus minus after they put all the stats together. But I'd like to see if that remained the same, if Castillo was still up towards the top of the plus minus and point differential as he has been the last couple games. Because although he hasn't looked the greatest on the stat sheet, although his shots are starting to fall, he did hit a nice three-pointer early in this one as well. His main asset this season and over the last couple games has been his defensive presence. Now, with him and Doug McDaniel on the court, you have two facilitators, and McDaniel stepped up and was like that leader in that portion, and I really liked it. And I think we should hopefully continue to play more minutes with both of them on the court at the same time. Having him and having one or both of the Joneses on there as well has been really great as well. And then David Gasson, obviously, whenever he's on the court, as of late, has been great, with the exception of the charity strike. We still got to get that down. That drives me nuts that we are a Power 4 team and we are awful. And I haven't looked at the stats lately, but I'm sure we're towards the bottom at some of the worst free throw shooting teams in all of probably all of college basketball, let alone the Power Four. Um, you know, Brandon Hawson was great. He shot a lot of really good 3-pointers, especially in the second half. He stepped up. I think he finished with 12. He had 9 or 12 last time. He finished with 12. He had 4 of them, and I believe all of them came in the second half, which we really needed. They need to step up. I'm hoping that we get to see that more energy sooner from him in games to come, because I do think that he has the opportunity to stay and be this core. I mean, if you can keep a guy like McDaniel, you can keep Austin, obviously you keep Castillo, those 3 alone, and it's probably like maybe a few other pieces, but those are probably the 3 that you have to aim to keep and then retool moving forward. If you can get those, your facilitators and your main 3-point shooter, I think you're in a good spot. I think you're in a decent spot moving into next season. Now, it all depends on what happens with the portal, and we all know that narrative right now and how we're all feeling about the portal. And then obviously the recruiting class right now needs to get much improved, and time is running out for that. But I really like what Howson's doing. But if you've noticed, and obviously this is coming out before we hear Jerome Tang's press conference, and we'll talk about his comments on the show either tomorrow or Friday. But what Jerome Tang is doing so far this year is he's not giving up on this team. And I know we see it on social media, and it's been very toxic, to be completely honest, but it's definitely been a negative atmosphere for this team. And criticism is definitely allowed. There's no doubt about that. I have gave my fair share of criticism to this team after how much you've spent on NIL and this roster and the expectations and where we thought this team was going to go. But overall, there's a reason why Jerome Tang is not giving up on this team. And the reason isn't that because he's stuck with this squad and because he has a high contract and he knows he's not going anywhere. That is not the reason. Okay. That's the pessimistic view. That is just not the reason. The reason is because of times like this. He sees the moments. He sees on Saturday that 36 minutes out of 40, he beats the top 10 team, Kansas, in their own house. He just can't finish a full 40 minutes. In this case, he starts off shaky, but strong enough to hold the lead and not fall apart like he has in the last couple games in the first 4 minutes of a game, and then steps up and shines for the most part in the first half. Should have had a bigger lead. Should have had a much bigger lead, but still go into the first half up by 4 and hold it for the full first half of the second half, wording, and just can't finish when this game is over. I'm sure I'm just going to put a guess here. In his presser, he's going to talk about how this team is so close and how he has to continue to tinker, because that's what he said over the last couple of days. And that's not a joke or like a comedic nod towards him by any ways, but I think that's where this team is. I think realistically, I don't think he's wrong. I think they are so close from being a good team, but unfortunately, once they figure it out, the season is going to be over, in the sense of just there's no more games left. The season is already over in the eyes of the NCAA tournament. But overall, I think they're just going to run out of games. So you have to tinker. You have to worry about the players that you have in front of you, and hopefully for the players you have for the future. And then just take that next step. That's the only chance they have. It's the only really solution they have to make this better moving forward, so they don't stay at the bottom of the Big 12 like they are right now. This conference is a beast, and then not just in college basketball. We see it in college football as well. The preseason rankings for college football, I know it's a basketball show, but just hear me out for a minute. The preseason rankings this year for college football for the Big 12 was basically backwards when it was all said and done. Arizona State was at top. I think they were predicted for the bottom. That stuff happens. It was a media poll, but that's same thing happens for the basketball world as well. It's all over the place. You can't guess where these teams are going to go. Arizona started off terrible this season. They figured it out, looks like. But Arizona has a preseason All-Americans on them, right? So this just could be one bad year for Kansas State. I don't think this means that we have to completely just burn the ships. I don't think we need a full rebuild. I think there is a strong reason. The more and more that I watch these games, and the more that I see that they are just a couple things away and just a few minutes away from playing a full game of basketball where they would be winning this games and not being in a 6-game losing streak. They are so close that you just have to have that faith and hold on. I know it's been kind of a long time for Kansas State to not be in the situation, especially because you're only a couple of years away from going to the Elite Eight, right? We're just that far away. We're only 2 years away from that. But just hold on. I think things are going to be fine. And I do think Jerome Tang is the right person to lead that parade. So we'll see. All right, we got a question here coming in. And it says, are they changing up defensive strategy, and which defense has been the most effective this season? Yeah, that's a really good question. They definitely looked like they changed up some defenses. In the second half, I think they just had a really tough time just defending Baylor, period. On the flip side, and I don't know if this is actually your question, but this came to my mind. So excuse me, Stephen. Thank you for the question. But on the flip side, I think the offense struggled mightily in the second half. Not only were they struggling with paint points, and I forgot to mention this, so thank you. But Baylor looked like they switched to a zone, and Kansas State did not have an answer for that zone at all. They struggled against the zone. They played a lot of man against Kansas State in the first half. Their shooting was really good. And once they switched that zone, which obviously limited their point production as well in the paint, it was just a bad go for them. So I'm sure that's going to be an improvement in practice this week heading into the next game against West Virginia, which that's going to be a tough game. There's not really any easy games left this season. There hasn't been an easy game this entire conference. And there's a reason why they're on a 6-game losing streak, right? But yeah, I mean, I don't know to tell you, to be completely honest. That's a really good question. Which defense has been the most effective for Kansas State this season? I really don't know that answer. That's something that we should probably look into and dig into and see which one it is. Let me know what you think, Stephen, and let me know anybody else listening as well what you think the best one is. But right now, when I'm thinking defense, the biggest issues that I'm worried about is them struggling to get rebounds. They have lost the rebound battle, I believe, every game so far at this conference. I think even the Cincinnati game, they lost the rebound battle. It has not been something that they have been successful at this season. And unfortunately, that is correlated to losses. So whether you want to play man, you want to play 1-3-1, you want to play zone, I don't think that matters if you can't rebound the ball, continue with moving the pace, keeping possession for yourselves, getting second chance points on the offensive side for rebounds. None of that stuff really matters if you can't be successful in the other aspects of the game, in my opinion. Well, it matters. That's probably the wrong things to words, but it's not the top priority. I'll put it that way. Yeah. Well, next up, like I said, West Virginia this Saturday. That's going to be a tough game. West Virginia has been up and down this year, but they're ranked. They're ranked 23. This is going to be another ranked matchup. It is back at home in Manhattan, so hopefully that helps out. West Virginia has came off, I believe they're off a loss last time I looked. Yeah, they lost to Arizona State. That's right, 65-57. But they did beat Iowa State by 7 just a few days ago. Now, Iowa State woke up and definitely had a revenge game their next game, but they took them down. They took the number 2 team in the country at the time down. That team is heading into Manhattan on Saturday. Tip-off of that game is 5 o'clock Eastern on CBS Sports Network. That's going to be a good one. Interesting to see how that one goes. Let us know your thoughts in the comment description below. What do you think of this game? I want to hear all your thoughts. I want to hear where you're thinking about this Kansas State basketball team. We're going to flip it up and change it up probably for the rest of the week as we try to get some better news. And we're going to talk some football. We got another transfer portal commit. We're going to talk about him. We're going to talk about probably a little bit of women's basketball as well, because we've got some injury news to talk about and see if they can sustain. And it looks like they're the top of the Big 12 now. So we have some good news there. And then we got some Dublin talk. We're already there. We're already at Dublin talks. We're going to finish off the week with stuff like that. But until then, please like the video. Please subscribe. And until then, this has been Locked On Kansas State.